Can you write blockchain smart contracts in Node.js? Yes, yes you can, and today you're going to learn how. Hi, I'm Calvin Powers with IBM Developer, and welcome to the IBM Developer Webcasts. The webcast this week is called Create a Global Finance Blockchain Application with Node.js Smart Contracts. And our presenter today is Rahell Zubairy, and he joins us out of Austin, I believe. Is that right, Rahell?
Yes, I'm here in
Cool.
Austin.
Tell us a little bit about what you do for IBM.
So I'm part of the digital business group. We're part of the emerging technologies, and we get to play around with technologies like IoT, fintech, and blockchain. And the past few months has been great seeing the blockchain technology evolve and the offerings that we have coming out. And we try to showcase that through code patterns.
Gotcha. And we're going to talk about one of the newest code patterns today. But before I let Rahell jump into this, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you are watching us today on the YouTube page, you'll note that there's a chat window to the right side of the YouTube player. And if you have questions for Rahell, type them there. I'll be monitoring that chat, and I will either interrupt Rahell immediately or hold the questions to the end, just based on context or whatnot. Also, I want to call your attention to the first link in the description field below the player. That link will take you to today's event page. The event page will have links to our blockchain technology page and other resources to help you get started with the code pattern that you're seeing today. And don't forget that the code pattern and the code that you're going to see today is all open source, so you can download it and try it for yourself. All right, Rahell, what do you have for us today?
All right, so I'll go ahead and start my screen share.
Sounds good.
Can you see my screen right now?
Yep. See
All
your
right,
PowerPoint.
Cool. All right, cool. So, I mean, I'll briefly, just we going through like an introduction before sort of jumping into a demo, and not sure what's happening. So I'll just go like this. So the agenda for today is that first we'll kind of talk about the global finance use case, give a little background and motivation for using blockchain for this system and how it benefits our participants on the network. And we'll also do like a little background on the thinking for this, like thinking behind the smart contract and designing this web application. And next we'll start looking at using this IBM Blockchain Platform extension for a Visual Studio Code and how we can use that to create and package our smart contract and then deploy to like a local instance of a Hyperledger Fabric. And then we'll like demo the application, again follow the steps on the code pattern that we have, which use these steps for using the IBP extension for VS Code. And then once we'll go ahead and launch the application, and we'll go through a few use cases, and then finally we'll look at the code behind the Node.js web application and how it interacts with our smart contract deployed on Hyperledger Fabric. So the global finance use case, I mean, this came about, it was inspired by a Redbook tutorial by Bob Dale, and which provides a very thorough walkthrough of blockchain technology and the architect and the concepts behind Hyperledger Fabric. And then it goes into like a detailed background on the global finance use case, on how it can really benefit companies and how it can benefit the participants on the network. And it creates a network through Hyperledger Composer. So this is where this code pattern differs, is that we're writing our smart contract in Node.js and using Hyperledger Fabric. And then again, this Redbook kind of goes and implements a web app with this network with user experiences for the 5 participants. So this code pattern takes that web application and then again connects to our Fabric smart contract deployed on Hyperledger Fabric. And before I move on, I just wanted to share this. Like, you can find it again, redbooks.ibm.com, and it's called Zero to Blockchain. And Bob Dale. So it kind of just walks through like different videos and exercises. And if you're interested in this use case, then and understanding more about like the concepts behind like a permission blockchain, then I would recommend maybe checking this out. So just talking about this use case, I mean, what we have is we have 5 participants. We got buyers, sellers, providers, shippers, and finance company. And what we're trying to do is track like orders which are placed by the buyers to the seller, and then the seller would reach out to a supplier or like a warehouse inventory uh, who have the products, and then these guys would then providers would reach out to shippers to ship the product to buyer. And once the buyer receives it, then they can authorize the finance company to pay the seller for those items. And what this does is provides traceability and transparency for these orders. So all of these members, like they can track in the orders as they're going through like different stages and there's different statuses as it's being updated by these participants. And then what can happen is like once the shipper sends the product to a buyer and the buyer sees something wrong with the product or something is missing, they can they can do a dispute, and they can file a dispute, provide some statements around it, and then these participants can see it, like sellers, providers, shippers, like whichever party is involved in that dispute, and then they can work to resolve that dispute, or in some case maybe refund the buyer. And then finance company is keeping track of all that, so they can immediately contact the participant which is having which may be causing a dispute. So some basic stories again behind this use case, and this is coming from that red book, is that as a finance organization, I want to see the finance related status of every order executed by my clients when they are using my credit service instantly and in real time. This will allow me to manage dispute resolution over the phone immediately rather than taking multiple weeks to resolve the dispute. So mainly again with blockchain, I mean, you instantaneously you can see a status as as the transaction is submitted by a participant. So now the finance organization is well aware of what the current situation is, and they can take actions immediately to resolve any disputes. And so as a seller, I want to see the order, shipping, and finance status of every sale in the system. So if the seller has, with this blockchain, they can again, keep track of orders and the history of orders as well. As a buyer, I want to see the real-time status of every order. So again, they know, sort of like like with shipping, that when the order is coming and those things. As a buyer, I want to be able to initiate a dispute with a click of a single button and provide all required data automatically to my finance organization. So once they get the product, initiating a dispute should be very straightforward, and it should add like an entry to the blockchain, which this smart contract and application provides for. And then as a manufacturer, I want to be able to see all open orders and the shipment status of all orders. So once a manufacturer ships the product, they also want to be in the loop on how the orders being shipped to the buyer. And as a shipper, I want to be able to interact with the system with as little change as possible on my end. So they should be able to update the order as it's being delivered, or any concerns, which can be then added to like the blockchain ledger. So now we'll start talking more about designing the smart contract. So what we again like the actions that we want from these participants are that we want buyers can create order, providing the items that they would like, the total amount of those items, the seller they want to purchase from, and again the finance company which will be part of that order. So this is like creating like a cart of your items. Next, they should be then again click that purchase button and purchase the order from the seller. And then some other items they should be able to do is like cancel the order. And then once they have received the products and they get verified, it looks good, they can authorize payment to seller. And if they're not satisfied with the items that they've received, then they should be able to initiate a dispute and provide some detail about the dispute. Sellers here, they can order the item from a provider. So once they get that order from the buyer, then they can reach out to a supplier or a provider to send those products to the buyer. in a normal flow. And then, once the buyer has received the product, then they can request payment from the buyer. So this would be right before the buyer pays, then they can request payment from the buyer. And then if there is a dispute involving them, then they can resolve it and refund if needed. Providers, if during a normal flow, they can, they should be able to request shipping from a shipper. So reach out to a shipper, add a shipper to this order to ship the product. If like they don't have the product with them or the items with them, they can back order on the order. And then if they're the party which is involved with the dispute, then they should be able to resolve a dispute or refund if needed. And shippers are, they're shipping the product to the buyer, so they can provide delivering status as items are delivered, and then they can update the order once it is delivered to the buyer. And then if they're the party involved with a dispute, then they can resolve a dispute or refund if needed. And then finance companies, pretty much they're monitoring this entire flow, and they can step in to to prompt one of these participants to take an action in a real world situation. But on the blockchain, once everything is satisfied, they can pay the seller once authorized from the buyer. So now again, as we can see, based on those actions, we got our transactions on our contract. So we would like, these transactions of creating order, this is buying from the seller, cancel order, authorize payment, dispute. We got a transaction where we want to order from supplier, which adds the supplier onto this order. Seller should be able to request payment from the buyer once the product is delivered. And then providers can, again, request shipping, reach out to a shipper. They should be able to back order. And then shippers should be able to update the delivery status, as the product's being delivered. And then when it's delivered, they should be update the status to delivered. And then finance company can pay the buyer. And then all these three parties should be able to resolve and refund the order to resolve a dispute or refund the buyer if there's a dispute. So again, also we can see that the like some of the sequence is like you can't just order do a back order if the order is just created. So it's again, so we need certain flows, certain aspects criteria have to be met, so that these transactions can occur in a particular sequence. So what we're trying to do is we want to track order, and it has a status of created, purchased, ordered from provider, shipping request, delivering, delivered, payment requested, authorized payment. Again, like some of the actions that we just talked about, that what they'll be doing is they'll be updating the status of the order, and it's sort of dependent on what the previous status of the order was. And we want to verify our participants when we're doing it. So wanted to just mention on the blockchain aspect, as a blockchain application developer, the two very important areas again of understanding is understanding the world state and the ledger. So the world state would be your key value store. So now when we start talking about writing our smart contract, we really need to understand this key value store on how we store our data. And again, it's going to be the current state at one time on of all our orders, of all our participants, and this will again, this is where we're going to try to reach out if you want to get data. And again, every transactions will update this world state. And then a ledger, it is again very important. It's like sort of the history of your transactions, and it's a linked list of blocks. Each block describes a set of transactions, and this is immutable, that blocks cannot be tampered with. All right, so now just kind of briefly introduce this IBM Blockchain Platform extension for Visual Studio Code before we kind of dive into it. So it can be used to create a contract, create a smart contract with like Node.js, TypeScript, and again, I think the latest makes it very straightforward in creating a contract with the necessary libraries to test it, and then it provides for packaging this smart contract. So it can be deployed onto a Fabric network. And then it provides to set up a local Fabric network instance where we can, as we're developing an application, we can easily test it and run it. And it again allows to install an instantiate contract on this network. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with the demo. And again, I'll start first by just pointing out that we have this code pattern here, developer.ibm.com/patterns, and that's where you can find this. And it provides mainly a link to this GitHub repository, which we'll be going through next. And I mean, over here you got a summary, a description of this code pattern. And I mean, I just kind of wanted to share it on this architecture diagram. Like what we're going to be doing is, as a developer, we're going to be using this VS Code IBP extension to write a smart contract and then deploy it to a local Fabric instance. And once it's deployed onto this local Fabric, we can we will install and instantiate the smart contract on this network, and then we'll use like the Fabric SDK, which will, I think, at the very end of the talk, we'll kind of go dive into this, how this Fabric SDK is used by this global finance application to talk to our network right here. And then
hey,
when
Raheel,
we have this application,
I just want to jump in briefly and just say, folks, this code pattern page is on the event page. So once again, click the event page link in the description, and you can get the link to the code pattern and the code and everything you need to do this at home for yourself, because there's some questions about that in the chat. All right, back to you, Raheel.
Cool. Thanks, Calvin. So yeah, so I mean, so once you have the application, then I mean, all your participants can work through this application in creating ledger and submitting transactions on the smart contract. So now we'll just look at this repository and we'll go to steps mentioned here. And again, brief detail, what we have is a contract, some images, and then this is our web application. And similar architecture flow. The prerequisites are what you need is you need it's the same as the IBP extension for VS Code. Like prerequisites for this extension are the prerequisites for this code pattern. So you need VS Code version 1.26 or greater. You need Node version. So this is very important. That I mean, Fabric currently supports version 8. I mean, like the latest version is probably, I think, up to 11 or even greater maybe. But I mean, you want to use Node version 8.x and the NPM version 5.x. So like, don't go with version 9 or 10. That's for trying this code pattern. And then you need Yeoman, and you need to have Docker on your local machine. So we'll now go ahead, follow these steps. So in a sort of a directory of your choice, you can go ahead, clone this repository, and I've like really increased the font size. I think I got a couple of typos going here. Let me just kind of restart. We'll go ahead again, clone this repository. All right, so we got a directory called Global Finance Demo, and inside that one, I've cloned this particular repository. So this step is sort of important. Is now we'll go ahead and open our Visual Studio Code. And what you want to do is you want to open the contract folder directly. And what this does is, again, when we're packaging our smart contract, I mean, currently you need to open that contract folder which has our contract in it to package it. So let me go ahead and find it. So this is the one I just cloned in my Global Finance Demo folder. And here is the contract folder. So I'm going to open this directly right now. And what it does is, again, it has this index.js, and inside this lib is our smart contract. So when you do like this, click F1 and you install the extension for IBM Blockchain Platform, I mean, you get some command line issues. So you get like these three options. And when you do a create smart contract, it will provide you with this setup of, with the package.json, and you'll have like a basic contract, and you'll have some testing functionality. So I really recommend when you're writing it, you can continue to test it. In this case, I actually had like a test application where I was testing it directly through that app, my smart contract. And right now, I mean, just like to kind of briefly again kind of go through this smart contract now, like which we kind of talked about in the slides. The motivation behind how we kind of constructed those transactions. So again, first thing is like right off, you can see the same order statuses that that were shown, which we would like for our particular order, when it's created, bought, canceled, ordered, shipment requested, delivered, delivering, back order, dispute, resolve, payment request, authorize, and and so forth. So when we start our contract, what we're doing is we're going to create a key value storage for to store the keys for our buyers, sellers, shippers, and our all of our participants. And this will kind of get more clearer as we launch the application. And then the next few transactions are registering a buyer, like registering our participants onto the smart contract, and we're creating this object with their ID, company name, type, and orders. And when we're registering them, they don't have any orders with them. And then we're storing their key as well under this buyer's key, so we can retrieve them later. So similar concept for all of these 5 participants that we have. And next we start jumping into some of the, our transactions to update the order. So the first one is, we want to create an order. And again, every transaction that you'll see that it will involve verifying the buyer ID. So we want to verify the participants that we have performing the transaction or performing the transaction with another party. So like for create order, I mean, we're verifying, again, it's like creating our order it's like creating like a shopping cart, you can say. So again, it's verifying, making sure that the seller ID exists on the smart contract, same thing with the finance company, and then creates this basic order. And a lot of it, is some empty fields and provides the details again. Mainly, this items is the big one, that, what items you're purchasing. And then this is the status, that it's updated the status to create it. And then in our key value store, again, it's going to go ahead and store this order with its order number, which is happening right here. So like order number is the key, and then you're storing this order. And what you're doing over here is you're adding this particular order under this buyer, as the buyer array we saw, which was empty for orders. So we'll go ahead and push this order number. And same thing for a finance company. So next few transactions, I mean, they follow again similar suite that you'll have. I mean, you're going to verify that the order exists. You're going to verify the participants exist, and then you're going to update the state of these orders. And before you update the order, you want to check to see that that it's like the previous state of the order is compatible. So like in this case, you could say, like, if you're canceling an order, I mean, if it's making sure that it is created, the order status should be in create state. I mean, sorry, like when you're buying it, I mean, the initial state should be that it was created. It's in the shopping cart before you can update the state as bought. So, and similarly, again, for the other transactions, you're verifying and you're making sure like the previous state of order is what it needs to be, and then you update the state of the order. So now what we would like to do is we would like to package this smart contract. And I just clicked this IBM Blockchain extension button. And right now, what I'm going to do is just kind of delete this package so we can package it fresh. And then what I'm going to do is, if you keep doing it, then I mean, you can either update the versions, or what I did was just delete it. You can export it and delete the previous version that you were working on. And then your local fabric, just make sure if you had done some work, then you can do like a tear down fabric runtime. So I'm going to go ahead and tear it down. All right, so now this is, again, if you're starting from scratch, this is what you will see, like no smart contract packages. You won't see any fabric instance. And again, I'm going to do like F1 and say, hey, package a smart contract project. So I'm in my contracts folder. That's the reason I opened my contracts folder directly, was to package it. And we can see that it got packaged here. And now what this extension provides is, like, with the click of a button, I should be able to set up a local instance of Hyperledger Fabric. So what it does is it's going to download all the images and then set up your network. So it had downloaded those images previously. That's why I think it kind of went a little faster. And then when I click this, I should see this My Channel. And then we kind of look at like the profile for this local fabric when we talk about connecting to it. But what it is like one peer, one order, and one certificate authority. And for this peer, then we'll say, hey, let's install the smart contract. And it's going to try to find all the smart contracts which are packaged here. So right now we have this global financing at 001. And we can see it just showed up here. Next step is to instantiate this smart contract onto this network. So we just do instantiate smart contract, click on it. And what function do you want to call? So we want to call instantiate. I mean, this was part of our smart contract where we had this instantiate function to set up our initial keys for our key value storage. And it doesn't take any arguments. So, and this may take up to a minute to instantiate this smart contract.
Hey, Raheel, while we're waiting, this might be a question you can answer quickly.
Yeah.
The question is the tool for VS Code something that can work with a remote Fabric server or only locally?
So it can work with the remote, and again, I can show it later on. But what it is that I clicked that local fabric. Instead, there was an option to do a new connection, and when you click that new connection, you can give it the connection profile and the keys to connect to a particular fabric network.
Okay, terrific. Thanks.
Yes. So at this point, I mean, our contract is now successfully instantiated, and now, I mean, we're ready to run the web application. So again, we kind of follow these steps presented here. We set up the fabric, and then we installed and instantiated the smart contract, and we're ready to run this web application. All right. So I'll just do kind of share that, I mean, like the Node version I have is 8.12. Because I think a typical, again, I'd mentioned this just because like a lot of like folks, I mean, for debugging purposes, usually the issue is that they're off with a different Node version, so that they can use a version 8 point something, and we'll do like npm install, and this will install like all our dependencies and the libraries we need. And after this, we'll go through a demo of the application, then we'll kind of look at like the libraries that we're using for this application. And what we'll get is, again, we'll launch our web application, and we should see, again, views for all of our participants. And now we want to set up and start making those transactions to see the global finance use case. So I'll do like npm start. And we got 6015. I'll open that up in my Google. And we're here. So the first thing, I mean, when you come open this app, I mean, what it provides for is you can preload the network. And we're going to do that. What this does is it's going to create, some dummy, participants. We'll have a lot of buyers, sellers, the shippers, and providers set up right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And every loading window will say, hey, check your terminal as request complete. So again, in the code, if you'll see, I mean, still, it has a lot of like console.log where you're constantly being updated in this terminal as it updates. And while it's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and open this application now, full on, instead of just the contract. So when we start looking at the web app, I mean, right now, I wanted to share, like, this is the startup folder you see has like the list of your dummy members, items, and orders. So what it's doing is it's populating the network with these items, with these these assets and these participants. So like once it's done, we should see all these sellers, buyers, shipper, provider, and we have this one finance company. And this is again coming from the Redbook tutorial, which I think was a great way to kind of to like jump in and start playing with the blockchain instead of creating all these members beforehand. So, and then again we have a bunch of item list. When it's completed, then you should see this auto load successful. So before I jump into the roles and looking at these particular views for these participants, I mean, I want to just add this feature to like show the blockchain. And what this is again is each transaction that we saw in our smart contract is now being added to the blockchain. And again, I mean, I'll just kind of scroll from the bottom where it will be you get your first block, and then this is our instantiate where we were creating those dummy keys to store the keys for our participants. And then I mean each of these transactions again kind of provides like the key value that it's updating. So I mean for our transactions, I mean we get like a transaction ID. So this we have a block number. We'll have the data hash for that block, the number of transactions in that block. And then for each transaction, it's going to show like the transaction ID, the timestamp, and the rights to that world state. So here in this case was, hey, this was where it's registering a seller. So I mean, it created this key with the seller's key, which is in this case is their email address, and then stored their information, where it tells what type it is, what the company name it is, and an order and an empty orders array. And then it also updates the seller's key with the key of this particular seller. So again, similar pattern we'll see again in this one, seller. So now it increments, it adds this newer seller key and stores this seller here. And again, as I scroll up, I mean, we should see buyers. I mean, so same thing is happening with the buyers. It's adding those buyers with their ID, company name, the type, and empty orders. And again, we've got a timestamp on every single transaction, transaction ID, and data hash. And again, I'll keep going up. So once it adds again shippers, providers, similarly, we're seeing those register transactions being executed here. And then it kind of comes into that create order transactions and just starts adding those orders. So it's going to store an order with its order number. So here the order number was 01. So it's going to use that as a key and then store that particular order. And again, with the buyer information, seller information, finance company information, and then it's going to update the finance company and increment this order to it. And it's going to update the buyer by adding this particular order to it. So we see this with, as it's adding creating orders for those buyers and just assigning a finance company to it. So you also have this admin user experience where you can create a member directly. You can list orders which are present now, and then again similarly you can see your buyers, providers, your participants on the network now. So now let's go through like a use case, and I mean you have these individual views of buyer, seller, or you can jump into this unified user experience, which is convenient in the way when you're going through a demo that you can go through. You have all your participants in this one view. So you have your buyer, your seller, your provider, and your shipper. So we'll go through one use case of where everything's going smoothly. So I mean, we select a buyer from here again based on their keys, which is identified by the email addresses, and I click display order status. And we can see that this particular buyer has these orders under them, 6, 7, 8, 9. And again, they're in the state of order created. So it's again like a shopping cart now. But now, okay, we're saying, hey, we want to purchase it. And we're ordering some, Lenovo ThinkPad in this one. And we say, hey, I want it. Or like my company wants it. So our seller here is listed at Second Life Systems, and then again I can do updates the status as ordered purchased. Now Second Life Systems, now they'll see this order once it's purchased, and it's added to the seller, and they can see it, see the state of it, and what they can do is then they can order from supplier, and they got a bunch of different suppliers on the network to choose from. So we can go with PC hardware now. Just do execute. And then we can do display order status. So status order submitted to provider. Now they can say, okay, let's go ahead, request shipping, ship this product to the buyer. And they got 2 shippers to pick from. And Fast Eddie is our shipper. We can do like a display, and it says shipping requested. And then they can update like a delivery status saying like on truck, and execute. So now it's being shipped, and now like again throughout all these participants, I mean they can keep track of this order. I mean they can see the status, what's going on. So even the seller knows, hey, it's being shipped here. I mean the shipper is happy, that it's being shipped now. Buyers, they all can keep track as it's going through these different stages, and finally we can say, okay, it's delivered to the buyer. And again, they all say, okay, it's been delivered. So once it's delivered, then the seller can request for payment. And again, payment requested on this order, they all can see it. And this is where when the buyer can say, hey, they can authorize payment or they can dispute it. So for this first use case, I'm just going to go ahead and say authorize payment. And we'll go ahead and execute. So once they've authorized payment, then, and I'll just open a newer window, and we can go into like the finance company view. And the finance company, again, they're always keeping track of these orders. Like they can see the status of all of these orders which are created with them. All of these are in created state. And for this order 6, they see, okay, the payment has been approved. So they'll go ahead and say pay, and click execute. And we see payment process. So this was a normal flow of an order for each of these participants to kind of keep track of the order from created till it got delivered, and for finance company to monitor the state of these orders. And so let me just try to do like one more. And for all of these, when you click a buyer, then you want to click again this display order status. And again, you have this option to like create new order. So we'll start with this order number 1, and here the seller is PC Hardware Inc. And we'll say purchase. And display order status, and we see it come up here. And we'll say order from supplier. Execute. So again, same thing. I think we got pick the same supplier in this case. So we see one of them is payment process. We see we have order submitted to provider. So okay, over here we can pick a different shipping company and say execute. So I have to pick this action. And again, over here, I mean, another you could play around is like you can do a back order. So back order would be, hey, if you do a back order, the shipper provides a reason. Hey, currently we don't have it in inventory. It's going to arrive later. But I mean, in this case, we'll just go ahead and do request shipping. And we'll do update delivery status is in transit. And we can say it's delivered. All right. So order is delivered, and seller goes ahead and does a request payment on it. And for this time, we'll pick the dispute option. First, again, we'll just go ahead, updated payment requested, and we can instead of authorized payment in this particular cycle, what we'll say is the buyer decides to dispute it, and he says that, hey, I didn't receive a terabyte, missing, and he'd ordered 5 of these, so we can say missing 1 TB, and do an execute. So they all can see it. And the finance company can look for this particular order now that the order is disputed. And they can see some details. Again, this section can be improved on, but like they can see, okay, the comment is missing 1 TB, missing. So they can again reach out at that time to the provider to resolve it. That, hey, send that 1 TB. So that the provider can go ahead, send it to the buyer, and they can do the resolve on this disputed order. So once it's resolved, then again the buyer can come in and go ahead and do an authorized payment. So again, I mean, at the same time, the finance company can be monitoring these orders. Again, once the dispute is resolved and the payment is authorized, they can go ahead and do a pay and just do execute. So payment processed on this one, payment processed, the seller gets money, and similarly, they all can keep track of the order as it's completed. And again, we just kind of, in this demo sort of on this blockchain that, we've been forming. So again, we can see, like as these orders are updated, I mean, we're processing those transactions on our smart contract to update the order, and we're updating the state of these orders in our key value stores. And this is one way where you can always go back and you have the timestamps for each of these blocks to track, when they were updated. So now, I would like to just, towards the end, kind of talk about like, the code for this web application and how you can write a Node.js web app and how this application is talking with our smart contract. So the first thing, we want to look at is this package.json file. And I mean, what we're using is this Fabric Network SDK to talk to our Fabric smart contract. And I mean, and I also wanted to mention over here was that, we've got some really great documentation on this. If you're designing an application, creating an Node.js application to talk to a Fabric network, then you really want to check this out, this Hyperledger Fabric SDK for Node.js. And it kind of goes in detail on, the capabilities you have and how you can interact with the network. So for example, like in this one, we were using the Fabric network to submit transactions and querying, but to get the blockchain, I'm using some of the features right here, getting the block by number, getting the channel height, and then just using block by number. So this application, one other library, it is an Express server. We're going to be using EJS to get the front end loaded, and then we got some other packages in here for processing our application. So in our index.js, you can quickly just see, we're looking under views and getting the HTML. So I'll kind of walk through from the front all the way to the back. So you got these different views under HTML, and again, for each of this HTML code, you have particular functions associated on those clicks, on those actions. So like for index.html, I want to mention this is our drop down, which is again preload is again the one which I'll kind of go into first up. Is when we loaded our network with those participants and orders, and then that's where we had the show blockchain option, and then again this is loading the views. So it's going to be calling particular functions in our JavaScript files. So we have these JavaScript files here under JS. And we got some CSS at the very bottom. I think the one primarily uses is pagestyles.css, if you decide to kind of extend on this. And these JavaScript files will have those functions which talk to it. And then we're going to be using jQuery to making our post call and get call to the server. So just kind of briefly, we'll take a look at this admin loads, and then I just kind of focus first on this preload when we preloaded the network. So when a user clicks preload, it takes you to this particular function, this JavaScript function with our HTML, and makes this post call to this setup and auto load. And again, if it returns successfully, it shows successful. If it's an error, then it's going to show an error. So now let's see on our server side, on our controller, on how we get to this particular post call. So under your controller, you'll have this router.js, and this is where it's going to route particular routes coming from the front-end JavaScript to a particular module on your back-end Node.js server. So here again, it's created this HLC admin, HLC client, setup, and blockchain. So these were primarily admin functions. These were like the user functions we saw on the user screens, setup, and blockchain. And these are now on my left side. I'm going to just show it's under features and under Fabric. So this is pretty much the heart of where it's talking to the Fabric network. And this was the post call we were making, setup, auto load. And so what it's going to do is it's going to go into the setup file, which is routed to this auto load file inside this Fabric folder, and talk to it. So and before I kind of go through it, I'll just mention, at the very bottom you can see all the other routes. Again, your admin routes and your client routes, and it's getting the languages. Another thing I wanted to mention with this, that you can select a bunch of different languages, and the way it does that, it's gonna use some languages under text to get those languages. But let's kind of talk about this auto load again, which we've been kind of walking through. Is we make this post call from the front end, goes to setup.autoload, and this is sort of, again, we'll see similar pattern where we're going to be using our Fabric network SDK to get the gateway and this file system wallet. And next, we're going to get a wallet directory. So this one is hard coded with some IDs. And again, at the end, I'm going to talk about extending this pattern, where you can extend to creating a wallet maybe for each users. But this one particular is just using this identity inside our ID wallet to talk to the network, and then is going to use this connection.json file. So this is very important, that this is again our network, which is deployed by the VS Code. So these ports are hard coded in it, and so again, I mean, if you deploy a local fabric using VS Code extension, then this connection.json file should work with it. Since like these ports are like sort of, I mean, it comes with these, it is deployed onto these ports using Docker. So once, I mean, we specify our connection, I mean, we've got like, this is finance IDs sort of provided as a constant. And we're going to go through this, just this auto load function and how we kind of go about it. So we connect through our gateway.connect, we specify the identity, and this is enable false if you're using a local instance. And we get our network, which is our channel, my channel, which we saw again when we used the VS Code extension. I can just kind of let's kind of start from, yeah, so my channel is the name right here. Just kind of wanted to point that out. And then again, you know, the smart contract that we deployed was called global financing. So you can use the network.getContract and do that. And then when you're doing query statements, you want to use evaluate transaction. So in our smart contract, we have a bunch of transactions, and then the one mainly transaction I created to query was get state. And what get state does is it's going to return the state of using a particular key. So if I'm going just looking at my global finance, I'm just going to pull this get state. Rest of them, all our transactions, this one is like one query statement, which is, again, you provide the key and it's going to pull the current state of it, the associated value for that key. So here, I mean, we're just going to get like buyers, sellers, providers, shippers. Again, we're just trying to find, like, you know, we're not rewriting anything. So for that reason, we're just going to get all the existing keys. Then it goes through the members of all those startup files. And again, I mean, I'm just going to open this up. So we're going to go through these and register the participants. And again, I mean, again, console.log was there, which was updating our terminal. And then again, we're submitting the transaction, and we're creating this transaction name based on, again, register whatever the member type was, whether seller, buyer, shipper, or provider. And then similarly, we go through all orders and just make sure the orders doesn't exist beforehand. So I mean, just kind of share is that, and if I go and do like admin, you should see some like error message right away. So, and then we disconnect from the network. So I mean, this is pretty much how you're talking to your Fabric network. And similarly, you can go through this HLC admin, which performs some of those admin actions of, like, you know, get members, get assets, but similar sort of flow where you're connecting to your network, getting the contract, and then you're getting the state. In this stage, you're just getting the states, you're not updating the ledger. And or here again, you're adding a member, so you know, get current states, and then you're submitting this transaction right here. Contract does submit transaction. And again, I mean, this code kind of again has a lot of console.log just to kind of provide a lot of detail in the terminal. But I mean, you can extend on, you know, this application. And then similarly, HLC client, we again, you know, starting with their Fabric network, getting our wallet, getting our connection.json, and then we got our, you know, actions that we're exporting. And again, you know, all these actions are routed through this router.js. And then these routes are coming from our JavaScript file. Inside here. So like, buyer actions are coming from this JavaScript right here, where it's getting that, is making those routes and then updating the front end. So so again, I mean, I'll just kind of now end this on, you know, how you can kind of take this further. And I mean, one aspect is you can create a wallet for every member, and use the members wallet to interact with the application. So for this one, you can use a Fabric CA client library to do all these actions. And second, I mean, you can use this application to interact with the IBM Blockchain Platform on IBM Cloud. And you can have instead of local Fabric, you can have your network deployed on the cloud, and you can have like each member interacting with their identities. So there you go. So thank you. And I mean, if Calvin, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer like these last 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Raheel. I really appreciate that code walkthrough. I think that really makes it real for everybody. There have been a few questions that came in. I think the one that's most relevant is there was a question about the capabilities of this VS Code extension versus Composer. Do you need to use both, or how do you position the capabilities between this VS Code extension and Composer?
Okay, so I mean, at this point, I mean, I'll mention like with Composer was like a tool on top of Fabric to make developing application easier. This is you're directly deploying your contract on the Fabric instance. So I mean, I would recommend moving forward if you're designing applications to go this route, and and again, it makes it very sort of straightforward in creating that smart contract in Node.js.
Fair enough. And then, so for this particular, and this particular project is based on a Docker deploy. Is that right?
Yes. So I mean, you do need Docker installed locally, and I mean, I can just jump to like the prerequisites. So when the VS Code is setting up that local Fabric instance, it is using Docker. I mean, you don't see it. I mean, all you're doing is just clicking the button, but in the background, it is using the Docker to set up your. And what I wanted to show here was like that these are your Docker containers running.
Okay, so I guess my question is, this project is certain. I guess using the VS Code extension implies then that you're using Docker deploys into Fabric. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So so what you have here is like each of your peers, orders, certificate authorities deployed as a Docker container.
Okay. All right. Because some people were saying they were having a lot of error messages from Docker, but I guess that's a good segue into a question about if somebody has trouble deploying these code patterns, is there a place where people can post questions about these?
So that one I'm not 100% sure, but there is a community. So you want to, again, on developer.ibm.com, you can reach out to our developer community.
Right.
And that's where I think you can post a lot of these questions.
Okay, that's totally fair. So developer.ibm.com, go to the community section and you can post your questions there. And then lastly, there was a question about, do we have any knowledge about a Hyperledger summer internship? Are you familiar with that at all? Do you have any information about that?
No. I mean, you can talk to my boss.
Okay. So I think doesn't the Blue Mix Garage have a page?
The garage, yes.
Okay, so we'll post a link to the Blue Mix Garage. I don't know, but I suspect if there's a Hyperledger specific internship, it's probably through our Blue Mix Garage page. So you can either Google Blue Mix Garage, or I'll post the link later today.
Okay.
All right, I think those are all of the questions. I will get Rahell's presentation as well as a link to the Red Book and put that on the event page. Obviously, it's not there now, but I will try to have that up there within the next couple of hours. So once again, Rahell, thanks for your time today, and thank you for the detailed walkthrough of the code.
Thank you, Calvin, for having me, and it was great being here.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.